There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation today. All right, most leaders, if you ask them explicitly, they will assure you that their teams are totally aligned behind the strategy. And they probably have had those discussions in various meetings, and people have probably nodded their heads, and indeed, it often looks like they are completely aligned. Now, I have to tell you, just this week, I talked with a top team where the reports from within the organization are exactly the polar opposite. Yes, everybody agreed in principle about where they were going with the strategy, but when it comes down to what that means, who is doing by when, how, where, what we're not doing, it gets a little shaky. So the question for today is, how do you solve this problem? A, how do you know where your team is? Are they really truly aligned or not? How do you ask more specific questions so that the misalignment becomes apparent? How do you resolve those issues and those details? And by the way, why does this happen? And how do you figure out what to do next? So that's what we're going to talk about. My guest today is a longstanding colleague, friend, client, I should say. John Hamm has over 30 years of global experience in strategy development, business transformation, executive team facilitation, sales force optimization, change management, innovation, and executive leadership, executive coaching. Translate, he's seen every aspect of what goes on with all of these teams and is well positioned to help us understand it. 14 of those years were with Prudential Financial, where he was the vice president of business transformation for Pru's International Insurance Group. And before that, he had over 20 years working in investment banks and in external consulting firms, places like Hay Group, Korn Ferry, and ultimately Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, where he's responsible for talent strategies for over 11,000 employees around the world. So needless to say, John has seen a lot of it. Maybe all of it in some version or another. John, welcome to the conversation today. It's fun to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Wanda.
Okay, describe the problem as you see it. I gave my view of what I think is happening, that it sounds good, but it doesn't really work. What are you seeing?
So, what you're observing, I have also been seeing over the last couple of years. And it is around this misalignment situation that I see among top teams, top senior teams. And I've facilitated literally hundreds of hours of senior team discussions on strategy around the world. And this topic of strategy alignment has begun to come up because more and more I see where senior teams do supposedly agree on the strategy, but as they go through the year, they begin to operate outside the strategy. And they begin to put in place new initiatives, new strategies that are not in the core plan of the business when it was agreed upon. And I'll give you an example. So I'm working with a financial services company. It's a top 5 player in delivering financial solutions. The top team has always agreed that the core competency of the company is to sell financial solution products directly to other businesses through intermediaries like brokers and agents and banks. And that's been their core strength, and that's how they've grown over the last 10 to 15 years. More recently, several of the businesses are beginning to work on approaches to reach directly to the customers. So B2C as opposed to B2B. And it's been clear to me that there hasn't been an agreement among the senior team that that's a core part of the strategy, part of its growth strategy. And as a result, there are pockets of initiatives that are beginning to show up, which cost time, money, and resources to invest in delivering financial services solutions directly to customers. However, there hasn't been a deep discussion on what the core capabilities are required to deliver straight to the customers, what are the potential risks, what are the challenges in terms of profitability that the company may face because you're going direct to the customers and therefore you need a different pricing model. So it's raising a lot of internal issues within the organization in terms of time, money, and resources being spent on initiatives that haven't been thought through carefully.
I think everybody listening has had a version of that experience. But my question is why? Is this a leader going rogue and saying, I'm going to do whatever I want to do and the heck with all of you? Is this an opportunistic grab? Here's a thing we could do. Let's go for it. Is it a backdoor conversation that the CEO says, okay, we'll go experiment? I mean, how do we get to this state of affairs?
I see a couple of things that have emerged that over the past several years. So, clearly the rise of digital technology, AI, is driving an opportunity that
Right.
many CEOs or business unit leaders are seeing and trying to capture,
Right.
right? Because they have an opportunity to reach a market segment or a customer that potentially they haven't been able to reach before, but through technology, there's an opportunity to reach that.
Okay.
So that's number one. The second thing that's emerging is this focus on growth. So over the past several years, I've noticed that a lot of the boards and investors are really asking this and pushing hard on leadership teams around where are you driving growth. So incremental growth is good, but there is a definitely call to action around what is your plan to grow the business? What does it look like? What kind of customers are you looking at? What kind of new customers are you looking at? What kind of new product solutions are you looking at? As well as what are the different channels that we need to explore more of or less of. So there is intense pressure on growth on these companies from different stakeholder groups.
I see that because I think it's easy to sit on the sidelines or sit deeper in the organization and assume that people are being self-serving. Where instead, what I think people are doing is exactly as you say, responding to the pressures and the opportunities are in front of them. You don't get to be on that leadership team unless you're good at spotting an opportunity, grabbing it, and running with it. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing. And then they're hoping that this will either pan out and become a bigger thing or give them some data, some experimentation, or people will just kind of marginally, get along with it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem, though, is that what I see at least is that then the resources are not well allocated to that effort because it takes IT effort, for example,
Right.
to get there. And
That's
there's
right.
not exactly this, excess supply of IT capability sitting around in most organizations that say, oh, yay, let me have something to do. So we put pressure on and then we're not
Mm-hmm.
aligned. Okay?
That's exactly right. That's exactly what I see when I'm working with those type of top teams is the downstream impact of of what we've described as the issue.
Right.
And so you have so many pockets of initiatives, and it all then because a lot of that is digitally driven, and it has such an impact on IT and operations because they are seen as the key enabler to
Right.
drive a lot of those strategies.
Right. And implications for risk and risk profile, particularly when
Mm-hmm.
we're looking at regulated industries as
That's
well.
right.
Okay. Years ago, I used to hear the complaint routinely among the senior leaders of an organization, not the top team, but the senior leaders. I don't understand the strategy.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a strategy. I'm not hearing that as much anymore. Do you think people understand the strategy, or do you think they understand the strategic direction, but they don't know what the details mean? What's your view on this?
I think this, like the mission and the vision and the strategy, is becoming clearer, and companies are spending more time around that because that was the noise where people were saying, "Where are we going? Why are we looking at this market, or why are we going after this customer?" And I think there was a lot of noise around that over the past several years. And I think that has subsided because a lot of the companies that I'm working with have focused on really fine tuning that
Right.
to the point that it's much clearer. So it's not to say that it doesn't need to be more clear, but I think those previous situations when it wasn't clear has been
Is it alleviated? Okay.
more specific. What I do see is that level of detail below it, and that's the
Yeah.
role of the next level line of leaders to really communicate. Okay, what does that mean? What is the implication of this, overarching company strategy on our group?
Yeah.
How do we drive that forward? What is our role? How will we hold ourselves accountable for it? How will we measure success? How does it true up to the more global strategy? And that's where the hard work of communication and execution happens. It's also where there needs to be senior alignment as well. Because if you have multiple businesses who are looking at pursuing different opportunities and growth, the different growth initiatives, there could be synergies
Hmm.
across business groups that could be capitalized from, once again, a technology and operations perspective. Because if you don't leverage that, then you'll have tremendous cost overruns as well as resources that will quickly be depleted because it's being deployed over many different
Definitely.
projects which have some similarities across different business units, if not different markets and countries.
Right. Yeah, what I see today is that the general direction we want to go, the goals that we want to achieve, and however you want to call mission, vision, value, purpose, whatever you label in each of those categories is a labeling exercise, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
statement of where we're trying to go, what we're trying to grow into, what we want to become, what markets we want to serve. But that when you translate that into where are we spending our resources and
Mm-hmm.
where are we not spending our resources, it becomes very ambiguous and it leaves it up for each individual business unit
Right,
to kind of figure it out. And then one person figures it out one way, another person figures it
right.
out another way, and we get a conflict. So that's what you're seeing as well.
That's right. That's right. And once again, that conflict is a little unintended. Once again, it's the pressure of growth, is the opportunities being driven by, to reach customers in a different way through technology. And most companies, they leave that decision up to those different business heads. But it is incumbent on a larger organization or company that has scale to bring those different businesses together and look at all the different initiatives and see where are the points of potential synergies and opportunities to leverage, and where are those points where we really want this business to try it out on their own and see what works, and they'll come back to the rest of the
Right,
organization and
right.
see where else can we utilize this particular capability.
I see. I'm going to come back to some of the more core functional. We've talked about IT, so I'm going to stick there for a moment because what I see is the business unit leaders may actually do a decent job of saying, great, if that's our corporate strategy, then I'm going after 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to put people in charge of 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to organize that and we're going to make that happen and we're going to go forward. And we need IT or whomever to do X, Y, and Z in order to achieve that. Great. But IT is sitting there with their own maintenance agenda,
Mm-hmm.
their own plans from 3 years ago of change this system, improve that, buy this hardware, whatever else it was that they were trying to deploy. And there isn't capacity to add in. And then they're left making up how they figure it out. And there's just potential then for the growth strategies, the opportunities to get lost, to get crossed in the middle. Not because anybody's being ill-intentioned, but because it just is hard to work out. The conflicts are difficult. So, John, do you think this has gotten worse over the years, or do you think this is a steady state of things that we've always seen?
I think it's gotten worse. Yeah, I've it's gotten worse. It's put tremendous pressures on the technology operation, the operations group, risk management, like you said, because they're trying to chase and meet the needs of the businesses, and it's so hard because the businesses are demanding so much in a very quick amount of time, because the opportunities are not going to last forever,
Yeah.
and they have to operate differently too, the technology team. So they really have to assess their own structures and resources and the way they operate to ensure that, yes, the infrastructure of the technology needs and the infrastructure and the cybersecurity requirements are
Right.
more than meets the minimum standards. I mean, it's as you know, the information security risks across many different industries are huge. So IT plays an important role in addressing that.
Yeah.
But then they also play this very difficult role of meeting the needs of the business. But they too need to operate differently, where they can't just say yes to every business requirement
Right.
or business need. They really have to see themselves as part of that strategic leadership team and pull back and say, these are the 25 different requests that are coming in from all the different businesses are being driven for the next half of
Right.
2025. You know, capital is not endless. So where do we need to make our
We
choices?
do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know every IT leader I've ever worked with has a roadmap for the next 3 to 5 years of what they're going to change, how they're going to change, what capability they're going to bring in, and so on. And they're very clear in their capital allocation, in their resource allocation, and in the plan for getting that done for the
Mm-hmm.
service of the business. But then there is no way to resolve the additional components that get thrown in. And I think that's where we're going from here. All right, one last question about the why we see this, and is I want to know where the problem lies. Is the problem lying because we're not doing offsites at the beginning of the year to get strategy aligned? Is it because we're not meeting as a top team regularly to talk about this? Is this just something that happens in the course of a general year? Where do we start looking for the solutions?
It's both. So, number one is the first thing that happens, in my observation, is the senior team meets periodically during the year, right? And then typically around the third quarter to fourth quarter, they get together for their annual planning. And it's at that point where I see one issue, which is at those meetings, they are planning meetings. Okay, so they are looking at how the businesses performed the year before, and it gives them a sense of what the full year is going to look like, and then they begin to lay out plans for next year. That's a planning type meeting. It's not a strategy meeting. It's not a strategy meeting where they're taking a step back and saying, okay, these are the customers that we have typically sold through, and this is the type of business that we've generated, both new and renewals, and this is the type of growth we've seen. These are the products and solutions that we've built, and this is the type of channels that we've utilized to sell through. That becomes a much different discussion if you take that step back and say, which customer segments do we want to tackle go forward? What kind of new products and services and solutions do we need to deliver? So that takes it from just a planning discussion to a real strategy discussion about where do we want to play in the marketplace, and what are some potential areas that we could win in given our core capabilities, and what are some opportunities in the future that we want to plant the seed now, because that could come to fruition in 2 or 3 years. Those are much deeper discussions that they need to convert a lot of what I've seen as kind of BAU planning discussions into, let's take a step back and say strategically, what are some new avenues of growth that we want to pursue, and how do we want to pursue it?
Okay. And is there opportunity, John, in that conversation to say, what are we taking off the plate?
Yeah, you have to. Without a doubt, strategy is about choices, and some hard choices will be made. I have seen multiple companies, it's very difficult to say no.
Yeah.
They don't have a natural kill switch, which looks at initiatives that we spent money, time, and resources that people have put in sweat equity into, and say, based on these measures, it doesn't seem like it's going to live up to its potential. We've got to stop it. And that kill switch is not often utilized for some of the companies that I've been working with. And it's not a natural muscle, because nobody
Right.
likes to kill things
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
people are somewhat risk averse. It makes them look bad. Maybe they have something that they're extremely passionate about, and they just feel like if they had another year, it might come to fruition.
Right.
And there have been a number of initiatives, particularly in financial services, where they've just fallen flat
Yeah.
because it hasn't resonated with the customer.
Well, it's hard to make a decision to say we're not going to pursue this line of business any further because you're going to lose customers in doing that. You're going to
Hmm.
lose people in doing that. Some of those are your high profile, top talent proteges. There's going to be feelings and reactions and so on. And there is revenue lost in that.
Yeah.
But you have to look beyond just the revenue to the pure profitability and to the future profitability. And I think that's what's so hard for companies to do for some reason. So walk me through the kind of steps you really recommend. You said get out of the third, fourth quarter planning. How do we do? What do we do a little more of next year? And really step back and say, what position do we want to be in? But walk me through what those steps really look like.
Yeah, so the first thing is, like I said, turn one of those planning meetings into a real strategy discussion. Is are we in the markets that we want to play in? Are we going after the customers that we think that we're going to make inroads with and win in the marketplace? So always ask that question around what more can we do and see what kind of pivots need to be made. The second piece is that kill switch. So if that's the choice, then you've got to take some things off the table, and everybody has to be involved with that discussion and be okay with it. The third thing is you have to ruthlessly monitor whatever new initiatives or even incremental investment you're making. So a lot of the companies that I've seen, especially once again, if you're looking at new customer segments and you're looking to approach it through more digital means, then you really have to look at not just leading measures. So this is a big issue that I see is a lot of companies use leading measures of whether or not an initiative is meeting its objectives, like adoption, customer utilization, people using things or
Yeah.
touching things digitally. Uh, that's that's uh, that's not a good measure. That's a good leading measure, but the lagging measure is, how much of that is turning into actual purchases, dollars, conversions, whatever you want to call it, and how many people not only buy it, how many of those people retain it. So you got to look at lagging measures and ruthlessly monitor those things. And if you don't do that, once again, you could be investing in an initiative for a very long time that actually doesn't bear enough ROI.
Yeah.
So turn business planning to strategic planning. Number two is ruthlessly measure and then leverage as much capabilities across the organization. So if you're not having strategy discussions and alignment discussions between business units to see, where are those leverage points and synergies, then you're probably operating inefficiently.
Right. Right. Among a bunch of my clients, I am stunned to know that a person running a business unit, small or big, frequently doesn't know their all in cost of producing their
Mm,
results. They'll know what their revenue stream is for sure, and they will ruthlessly monitor that. But there are so many hidden costs. Like there's an allocation cost, there's a cost of
hmm
services. It's hard to get a handle on them. And
Yeah.
I'm finding a lot of people are doing a really bad job. So then I don't know I know I'm making money, but I don't know what it's costing me to make that money.
hmm
Are you seeing that as a routine problem?
Yeah, it's a routine problem. And in fact, I've talked to a couple of clients about this very same topic. And also, once again, not to put technology in the spot, but so much of the business's R&D and spend is now tied up in technology. It's a huge line item, and they cannot get to the true costs of their business because there are so many allocated costs from different organizations, such as technology, that they don't have clear visibility into. So
Right.
there's an allocation, and based on different general ledger systems, it's very hard to get underneath what is being
True.
truly
That's right.
allocated to them and how much was directly tied to the investment that was made to drive a
Right.
particular initiative. So it's very hard for businesses to measure their total profitability. But it is incumbent on the organization, the company, to promote a higher degree of transparency so that the businesses can
Right.
see how truly
Right.
profitable they are.
Right. Right.
Now once again, some companies have very decentralized operations. So IT operations, risk, they all roll up into one business unit. those companies shouldn't have any problems really, determine profitability. But then if you organize that way, then you might not get the synergies from an IT
Right.
perspective that you would hope for. So there's kind of pluses and minuses of having these type of enabling groups, centralized versus decentralized. If you want to look at true profitability, and if you want to drive kind of quickness and speed to market, I have seen companies that have decentralized parts of its technology organizations into the businesses, but I see a lot more moving away because the cost of implementing AI initiatives is so great, and it doesn't make sense to have data scientists and engineers, within each business unit, and it's much better to deploy that centrally. So I think profitability and transparency of profitability will continue to be a challenge. They'll have to use some rules and of thumb initially, but there has to be greater transparency about allocations.
Right. And some of that depends upon how your financial metric systems are set up and what you
Hmm.
report and the level of granularity. Before we blame somebody's not doing their job,
Hmm.
there's a lot of systems processes that make some
Yeah.
of these difficult, centralization being one of them. Okay, John, in your experience, how much time does a top team really need to spend making sure that there's an alignment?
I think it's very good. I mean, most teams should be meeting at least quarterly, to have kind of a deep dive into the performance, a quarterly business review. So most organizations have quarterly business reviews, and they review, how their performance is, and I think that's sufficient for any new initiatives that are requiring a significant amount of spend where the results are uncertain because it's brand new and the company hasn't really engaged in it. There has to be somewhat regular reporting around the success of that particular initiative. Once again, we don't want to wait too long to hit the kill switch if a lot of money is being spent, but we're not seeing those initial measures of adoption and outcomes that we're hoping.
Right.
So those have to be much more
Much
frequent.
very quick. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What kind of questions does a leader need to ask in order to know that that team is truly aligned behind the strategy and making the right kind of decisions? I get your regular review of where do we want to be and how do we want to be, but it's easy for people to sit around the room and say, "Yeah, that's right, but I'm still doing this thing over here." So, what kind of questions does the leader need to be asking?
What are you seeing in the marketplace, in your unique marketplace, in your unique segment of the industry? What are you seeing? What are you seeing that's emerging? What kind of opportunities are there? Those conversations, that question needs to be constantly had because no leader, no business unit leader is going to start to invest in money unless he or she had that conversation with his or her boss. I
Right.
mean so if you keep asking that question, then there could be alignment very quickly around, yeah, we should explore that. Then you bring in at the quarterly business review some discussions with the broader group and say, hey, XYZ person is going to go after this market and this customer segment. Are there synergies? Anybody, is there opportunities that perhaps we can do this across business units, or is this really within this own business unit? So it's a very simple question because nobody would start investing millions of dollars in a new initiative without having seen that opportunity emerge, and then it's a natural part of that discussion with his or her manager to say, I see something and I want to go after it. I have real conviction
Right.
around it.
Right. So, what I'm hearing that is different in your proposition is the acknowledgement that the pressure on digitalization and the pressure on growth and the desire to grab an opportunity are strong, stronger than ever, and that leaders, in the best of intentions of the world, see those, grab them, and go after them.
That's
Right.
right.
Sometimes you do that just for let's see, and it's not a big deal, so you don't really worry about raising the flag on what you're doing. Sometimes you have to raise the flag because the capital allocation or the resources or the whatever is much bigger, and also
Yeah.
depends on the relationship with how the organization is run. But those pressures to try new things starts to break apart the alignment that we've created around our strategy. So we pile on things
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to intentionally making choices
Right.
about what to keep, what to kill, how long to invest, what metrics we use for success, what to monitor, not monitor, and including the synergies that we might find across business units that make this a more reasonable thing to do. And so what you're advocating for, I think, is an intentional conversation about the cost of the opportunities, the size and the cost of the opportunities. Is that fair?
That's exactly right. And there has to be accountability and commitment by the senior leadership team. So if they commit to it, then they have to be accountable for delivering on and communicating on the success of that.
Right.
So it has to go back to the team for
Okay.
sure.
Okay. All right. You say strategy is a political game. Explain why you say that.
Well, there's one aspect of what what you notice, which I do notice, and there is a small percentage of politics that happens when it comes to strategy, and we touched upon it, and that is there are initiatives that a particular leader may have that's near and dear to his or her heart, and I could think of a couple in the financial services space where they're wedded to a certain type of investment
Yeah.
product or solution.
Yeah.
They've seen it in the past. They absolutely love it. They know it will work in this environment for this particular company, and it does show up as political because that person is so vested in it and is pushing for it. And but what it is actually is passion. The
Right.
person is quite passionate, has seen it work, and but also has some blinders about it.
Yeah.
So the market changes so quickly. Certainly, if you have an idea and a passion that you always had about a particular, in this case, financial solution, it's very understandable to embrace it so wholly. But that person also has to really look at him or herself and say, do I have a kind of blind spot around this? And then as a result, they kind of show up as somebody who's pushing an agenda,
Yeah. Yeah.
and those leaders should take the time to say, I know I love this product or solution in the past. What about it has changed? Bring in that discussion to his or her peers to help, kick around
Yeah.
and get them engaged as opposed to just pushing the agenda.
Right.
But, tee up the agenda, do push it, influence, but then open it up for discussions about, hey, where are the opportunities? Have you seen the opportunities? Is it maybe a different flavor? And that will help reshape the view of that leader for somebody who is purely just focused on driving his or her point of view or his or her approach to one that's truly thinking like an enterprise leader.
Right.
Here's an opportunity. What do you guys think about it?
John, I think what you're advocating for is airing the inevitable tensions and conflicts that exist in what we do and how we do it and where we make money and where we spend our money and so on. But it's finding a way of airing those
Mm-hmm.
and genuinely discussing them
Mm-hmm.
rather than just pretending they don't exist, paper over them, and each goes on to carry out their own best plan with best of intentions. It's that intentionality. And I think also what you're asking is that means that leaders come to that table prepared as an enterprise leader to
Mm-hmm.
make trade-offs, which may mean I don't get what I wanted for my in-business investment because we're going to make the commitment over here.
Mm-hmm.
It's those trade-offs that become the hard conversations and the ones
Yeah.
I think we're not having.
Yes, that's a very difficult discussion, and top teams are not having that enough.
Yeah, yeah. I think they happen bilaterally,
Mm-hmm.
usually with the person and the CEO, but
Yeah.
rarely in the group, so that there's a
Right.
general commitment to it. They're difficult to have. There's no question. There's no easy answer. All right, I want to flip the question and go, so many of our listeners are not on the top team. They're in the middle of the organization, living with whatever those top team leaders decided or didn't decide or went off the rails on deciding or whatever. And they're sitting there going, I don't get the strategy. I don't like the strategy. And by the way, my boss doesn't like the strategy either. The boss's boss may be committed to it, but my boss and I am not committed to it. What's your advice for people who are sitting in that position where they just are not really totally on board?
My rule of thumb is whatever is discussed at a senior team meeting, a good senior team meeting will result in an agreement to move forward on a particular strategic initiative. Okay. And once you leave that room, you have agreed to move forward. And that you may not have agreed that when you went through the prioritization that this was top of the list, but there has to be enough discussion and enough robust detail and understanding the market potential that has identified a particular initiative over another. And as a senior leader, you have to buy into that. And if you didn't, you have to ask the question. And if
Okay.
you don't have an answer that has satisfied you, you're either you have to take a step back and look at yourself and say, "Hey, am I have my blinders on? Am I not hearing things that perhaps don't challenge the assumptions that I have about this initiative enough?" Or you come around and say, "Okay, I understand your point of view," and
Okay.
then you move forward. So if there's levels of misalignment, that needs to be explored about what happened at that very top level,
Right.
that
Right.
discussion.
Right.
Yeah. And but if it does happen, and most companies do, where hey, there's seemingly alignment here, but all of a sudden when you start going down deeper and deeper, um, it's the role of each respective leader to be able to paint the rationale for why we're moving in that direction. And if he or she can't do it, he or she needs to find out what the story is and get back on messaging.
I think this comes back to conflicts again.
Mm-hmm.
So, I moved down 2 or 3 steps from the senior team within an organization. And there's the person that's living with all the legacy things that haven't been completed, all the projects in the last 3 years that they're still trying to wrap up, the new things that are coming in, and pressures coming from all sorts of different directions for time and capacity, and struggling with managing it, and
Yeah.
doesn't feel that they have enough political clout to really raise their hand and say, whoa, and usually living in an organization that won't deploy a kill switch.
Mm-hmm.
So that there's no way to actually get the prioritization in the middle of the organization worked out,
Yeah.
right? Reality down to the ground, not
Yeah.
wishful thinking, real priorities. All right.
Yeah.
What's your advice for the person who's sitting in that seat that says, I can't do it all. I've told everybody I can't do it all. I might be aligned on the strategy, but I don't have the capacity to do it. I need a prioritization. How do you help that person?
I coach all levels of an organization, and I do coach managers who are at that receiving end of all those initiatives, and they're the ones that have the 200 emails sitting in the inbox from that
Yeah.
day, and they have not had a break because they've been 10 hours of straight meetings, and they didn't even start their day yet,
Yeah.
and it is so hard on them. I tell, and they share with me that they have gone through that process of escalation, and at the end of the day, what I advise them is don't stop. Okay, because more often than not, at some point the organization will have said this is too much.
Mm-hmm.
And the companies that I've seen this are some of the most well-known companies in the world.
Yeah.
And there will be a day of reckoning, and this is what I tell them, where management will need to take a step back and say we got to stop because it's just too much. So I tell those folks not to despair because they're doing as much as they can, and that they should continue to have a voice because there will be a day where management will take a step back and we're doing too much, especially in this day where there's so many hundreds of millions of dollars that's being spent on AI and digital and data analytics and product transformations and things like that. Everybody's trying to do everything to see what works and whether or not it'll grow the business. Every company will reach a point at some point where they'll say, this has taken a life of its own.
Right.
Yeah.
So keep speaking, keep
Mm-hmm.
challenging, keep
Mm-hmm.
pushing. I would say make your best guess on what you think has the highest priority, highest likely of return. Be
Yep.
prepared to justify that. Be prepared to pivot. But I don't think I just said work 29 hours a day.
Yeah.
You can't sustain that one.
You
Yeah.
can't sustain it. You cannot sustain it. So choose your battles based on what you feel will have the greatest business value.
Right.
And they know what it is. They know what it is because
They-
they're doing the work, and
Yeah.
they're seeing the uptick. They're seeing the level of results that would indicate that this is something worth it versus something that's clearly maybe potentially a pet peeve type project.
Right. I just think sometimes it's hard to go above your boss. You think your boss should be carrying the message, and your boss isn't carrying that message credibly. And I find at times you have to move outside of that realm, and that's a scary place to go.
Yeah, typically, if you and your boss have had that discussion and you run into your boss's boss, if you had that discussion with your own boss about your concerns about we're on 15 AI projects and only 7 of them seem to be making sense at this point in time. I always say it's okay to say it because you already flagged it to your own boss.
Okay.
And
So courage in some ways.
yeah. I mean, that's a big political risk.
That's right. Oh, I guess strategy is a political game after all.
But once again, you have to stand in your leadership. Like, what do you have to see yourself as an enterprise leader, no matter where you are sitting in the organization. If somebody asks your opinion on, hey, what do you think is going wrong here? You have to operate outside of the structure of the organization and stand up as an enterprise leader and say, this is what I see.
Right. And if you say it in that way, this is what I see, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what my group is finding. You've not said 5 other groups have done a mistake. What you've said is, this is what I'm seeing. So again, the language is going to make a big deal of difference.
Right. And then you always ask a question. So it sounds like you're not just saying, but you're also inquiring. And when you go and run into that person and say, what are you seeing? That promotes the discussion.
Right. Okay. John, I think this comes down to my favorite topic, which is to say that everything good that happens in an organization happens in a conversation. And what you're advocating for is better, deeper, more thorough conversations in advance to tripping ourselves into an action. So that it's a more intentional choice and therefore a stronger commitment around that choice, increasing the chances that we actually deliver on it, that we know how to measure the success of it, we know what the timeline might look like, and we know what our real cost and align synergies might be in order to deliver it. But if we don't have the conversation, we're stuffed.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly.
Exactly right.
All right.
Yeah. And the courage.
And the courage.
And the courage. Yeah.
All right. Fabulous. John, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to find you?
Just reach me on LinkedIn, John Hom, H-O-M, and I'm happy to get back to anybody who's interested in talking about this topic more.
Okay. All right, John, thanks for being a guest. What a great conversation. I can't say enough about how important it is to have the hard conversations. And I think that's what you're advocating for, is that we can't just paper over. We've got to really dig into where real problems are happening. So thanks for joining us, and join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone. And by the way, like us on your favorite podcast provider, and we'd love to hear from you. Go to our website, outofthecomfortzone.com. Send me an email. Love to hear from you. And see you next week.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.